I'm Edward Peake. Welcome to this edition of Arts Alive, the arts programme here on Bay TV. Today we're going to go to the Open Eye Gallery for a major exhibition. It's Robert Heinecken. It's entitled Lessons in Posing Subjects. Because of the nature of the subjects, I have to warn you that there is a little bit of nudity involved, but as you'll see, that's a rather important part of the content. It has to be there. So let's go over to the Open Eye now. We're going to meet Lorenzo Fusi, who's the curator of the exhibition. So here we are at the Open Eye Gallery. We're going to go in and meet the director, Lorenzo Fusi, who's got an incredible store of knowledge about this incredible Robert Heinecken exhibition. Come and look. Lorenzo, this gallery is known as one of the nation's premier archives. Is everything kept in the building?
Everything is kept in the building, and actually,
is there a big cellar full of photographs somewhere?
Kind of. I think we are kind of suffering of the ambivalence of definition, because we are not a museum. So, in terms of governmental definitions, we don't really have a collection, although we do. The collection is called the archive, and the archive is comprising 1,650 odd photographic prints, which of course, once they're unframed and systematized, they don't really take too much room, but it's a big collection. And so I think one of the challenges for the future is try to push the boundaries of a definition and really understand what does it mean for a gallery who's primarily focusing on the creation of temporary exhibition to also have heritage and the legacy of so many photographic works. At the moment, we are working towards at least one exhibition per year, focusing on our collection or thinking about archiving and collecting photography in general, but still is not at the core of our activity. In that sense, we are different from the Museum of Liverpool as well as Tate.
So now, you've got Robert Heinecken in the exhibition. Now, it's one of those very famous names, one of those people you've been aware of all your life almost. Most interesting. How would you describe him in one or two words?
Maybe one of the most radical photographers, because he really challenged the notion of a medium, the language of photography from its inner component, which is the making of the image. And in that sense, he really tried to push the boundaries of what photography was up to that point, and he's been helping to redefine what photography is considering now.
So he's known as a para-photographer.
Well, I mean, as a matter of fact, as he himself admitted, he hardly used the photographic apparatus ever.
That's astonishing that he didn't use a camera for a lot of things.
But, especially at the time where the analog process was more important, a big component of the making of the image was the printing process. And, it's kind of going back to the avant-garde and people such as Man Ray, etc., where the printing was as much important as the capturing of the image in the creation of the photograph. And so it basically focused on alternative ways to make images surfacing onto the photographic paper.
I know he had this weird thing he used to do. He would photograph, a magazine, but have it lit from underneath. So you got two images.
Exactly.
And very often the images weren't related. What a strange
That is
way of doing things.
It's really one of my favorite bodies of work by Heinecken. It's called recto verso, which is like the front and the back of the same image. And it's really interesting how, unconsciously or subliminally, you create very weird, bizarre, but sometimes very poignant associations by simply, unveiling simultaneously what is on the front and the back of the same page. That is of a magazine or an illustrated book, etc. And especially at the time where we got this kind of overload and saturation of images bombarding us.
Many of the works here do have the appearance of a catalogue photography. He's almost saying, don't just look at it for a second, because catalogues want us to turn the page quickly. But he's saying, no, look at it in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, the first step in the process is to recapture images which were already published on those catalogues. And in doing so, he started using the Polaroid camera, which is all about the instant image, right? So the Polaroid, in principle, it's the tools through which you are opposing stage photography, right? So it's like the snapshot. It's like what we do nowadays with our mobile phones. And so by recapturing images which were published in catalog with a Polaroid, what Robert Heinecken does is bring in life to those characters. And I think that's like, is a semantic change, but also is a visual change, is an emotional change. So all of a sudden, these people that they're posing for us, they're becoming people that they're posing for themselves, kind of caught in a moment of private life. And that is a radical change. I mean, the moment that you look at these images with this new, under this new perspective, they completely change meaning. And what you see is like, sort of a reenactment of a spontaneous way of living. But by doing so, you see how fake the images originally portrayed in the catalogs are. And so this is kind of a sort of a vicious circle, which is about really reflecting about the images that we are producing, disseminating, consuming on a daily basis.
I suppose what he's trying to do, he's saying, when you look at a catalogue, you don't do any work yourself. The person who's produced the catalogue does the work, but in his work, you have to add half of the work to it. The image is there, but you've then got to add the
Absolutely.
thoughts.
And but also, like, as I was saying, there's this idea that when you look at mail order catalogs, you quickly need to understand which one is your role in the one performed in the catalog itself, because you have to get the type of product that you are desiring, right? And what type of lifestyle you try to achieve through the purchase of certain goods. Now, what happens with the images in Heinecken transformation, I would say, is more looking than selling a product. It's more looking about the selling of stereotypes of people and societal agreements or structures. And so what you're buying really through his images is you're buying on the understanding of society through gendering roles, such as the father, the mother, the lover, the concubine, all of the kind of different type of roles that we are all performing, not understanding that we do perform all of them in our lifetimes. And we are not only one element, we are all good and bad, we are all kind of vicious and innocent, we are all babies and then mature adults. So all of the elements which are fragmented into a sort of a more stereotyped society according to what these publications they were saying, they're actually all part of what we are. And so, as femininity and masculinity are not so rigidly separated. I mean, we're both, embodying both genders continuously. And so I think it's very interesting to look at these images now through his lenses, because it's really anticipating a much more critical analysis of visual culture than the one that were used before his time.
So Robert Heinecken doesn't want us to be just a passive observer.
Oh no, it's about really taking active part in the elaboration and analysis of images.
Shall we have a look at the pictures?
Please.
Lorenzo, this exhibition is from a series called Lessons in Posing Subjects. What did he mean by that? What was he trying to tell us?
Well, as I was trying to say, there's a very strong, there's basically an invitation from Heinecken's side to look at imagery through the codification of rules. And so what he does with this body work, which is actually going all the way around the gallery, so it's probably one of the largest presentations ever attempt of this series, is really to try to group images coming from different catalogs and different periods and group them through poses as regular features, which are repeating themselves over and over and over again in the representation of femininity, masculinity, etc. And so, for instance, if we are looking at the Polaroids which we have behind of us, there is a set of 3 images focusing on young females, and there are standard pose, as Robert Heinecken calls them, which are repetitions which are happening across different publications and different time, and is focusing in this case on the position of the hands and the arms in the representation of femininity. And so you have, in the one behind of you, there's one pose which is about having both of the 2 arms lifted up, which is, you think about this kind of liberation and being kind of embracing the sun. It's a sort of a very open gesture and pose, but also it's very seductive, right? Because often they touch the hair in doing so. The one behind of you is actually more of a summer feature, and is this idea of almost sheltering yourself from the sun.
They're all standard, very old-fashioned, well-used poses.
Absolutely.
He's saying something completely different with it, though.
They do basically just highlight how we do understand the setting, the context, through very simple gestures. And these are the poses which are repeatedly used in this type of publication. So, as I was saying, like, the idea of a heat, sun, but also this kind of lascivious, attitude of just being hit by the sun rays, especially in countries which were sun deprived, is immediately a very sensuous, gesture to propose. And therefore, the type of clothing that goes with it, is all about kind of creating that experience. And so other images, such as the one behind me right here, is about just having a lock of hair in your fingers and this kind of more pensive pose. Again, it's very standardized, it's kind of repeating over and over again, and it's kind of, to my eyes, of course, so, we might have different interpretation, it's more the innocent, slightly more intellectual, gesture compared to the more seductive one which we were describing before. And the same applies over and over again, not only to women, but also to men and children as well, because of course, it's all this idea of categorizing what is the family structure according to what they could buy and what experience they want to buy with the garment.
He's having fun with us, really, because he's making fun of the stereotypes.
Absolutely, but it's these stereotypes are so powerful if you think about the majority of the Hollywood productions, if you think about any form of communication, including advertisement, is really inviting us to think of families the same way. Also, this is the time where race was, not tackled by this type of publication. So if you look at the images, you see that in none of them, the issue of race is addressed. And there are no elderly people. So there's a very specific fragment or fraction of society depicted in there, which is the society that they were trying to promote and push, which is basically white, heterosexual, young, healthy and beautiful, and wealthy enough to afford the garments that they were proposing. So it's interesting how a lot of different inputs that were trying to impose this type of society as the only possible way, which is basically what you might call nowadays, the American way.
Well, it is the American way, because so many of the original American television series, they had beautiful grandparents of 35 years old.
Absolutely. And hardly any difference in the clothing between the mother and the daughter, for instance, right? So it's kind of compressing the experience of life in a very specific space, which is the one where you are actively buying products.
Robert Heinecken challenging our perceptions of what beauty and style are. Quite remarkable exhibition. Well, after the break, we're going back to chat again with Lorenzo Fusi. He's got some interesting insights on how Robert Heinecken's mind worked. See you then. Welcome back to Arts Alive. Well, we're going to have another look now at the Robert Heinecken exhibition at the Open Eye Gallery. We're going to find out exactly what a para-photographer is. Lorenzo, we're in another part of the gallery now. Now, these photographs are quite different from the others.
Yeah, this series is called Tuxedo Striptease. And they're still Polaroids, just simply a bigger format, bigger print. And to me, this is a very interesting series because we were raised with the notion of sensuality being portrayed by Playboy, for instance. And the Playmates, often they were wearing tuxedos. It's like this kind of idea of playing with gender, right? And so you have images taken from different publications, and it goes progressively towards nudity, but still with having this kind of elements of masculinity, like the bow tie and the white shirt, brought in almost to the end, when the last image, the concluding image of a striptease, is a newborn boy with a tuxedo. So it's kind of, stripping basically masculinity from femininity and then bringing it back into masculinity again. And so it's like a wordplay, in the work of Heinecken, which is continuously challenging the ideas on how we are aroused, how we are attracted, how we are seduced by the image produced by corporations.
So you're saying about the dinner jacket. It reminds me so much of the cabaret images of Berlin. Is that just my imagination?
I think it's part of our culture, especially the moment of visual transgenderism is very sexy, right? So this kind of idea that you're confusing the gender, and it's kind of introducing, in a sort of a very subliminal way, notion of homosexuality, for instance, but in an acceptable form, is incredibly, seductive. And actually, these images will make me think of a famous film by Liliana Cavani, who's an Italian filmmaker, who basically portrayed Charlotte Rampling, who, is quintessential beauty, and in a sort of very masculine way, wearing military uniforms during the Nazi period, be the perpetrator type of thing, is what really is making the images incredibly sexy. And I think in here, this kind of victim complex of the woman being objectified, but almost kind of, taking ownership of that space, is what is making these images so contemporary still.
This is quite different. This looks like the raw material that he started with.
It is indeed. This is basically the research in preparation of the creation of images. And in fact, you can literally see exactly some of the poses taken from these pages and then transferred into Polaroid in the other rooms. And this is the set, for instance, which we were referring to at the beginning of our conversation, where you have women just kind of raising up in a sort of a relaxed stretch way. But you have a quite extensive representation of lingerie, which we were saying, it was probably the introduction of several generations to nudity, sensuality, and it's sort of a sexual education, I guess, that we all had through the pages of these magazines. And then I think it's very interesting. It's not only looking at the poses, but also try to understand and decipher what those poses meant. Because some of the lingerie is actually very much for teenagers, so it's much more innocent and candid. Some others are actually quite explicit. And so it's like, all these kind of codified ways to read femininity, through age. And, again, it's performativity of gender, at its best examples. And so I think this vitrine is actually very, very important, because you understand the difference between having the original images printed on paper on the catalogs and see the difference with the Polaroids, which are, decontextualizing those women and men and bringing it into the sphere of privacy and intimacy.
Interesting how his eye has seen all these little tricks of the trade.
Yeah, I mean,
and he's transformed it into something very, very different.
I think he was an incredibly skillful reader of images, more than maker of images. And so through these continuous interpretations, he was able to produce newer work. And then maybe the last reflection to be made on this series of work is what does happen when you do physically collage images together, which is somehow alluding again to the Recto Verso series we were talking about. And so in the last wall of this gallery, you do have images which are physically composing and bringing together images from pornographic magazines as well as catalogs such as this one. So more innocent and more explicit imagery is combined together. And the trick he does use in rephotographing this material is to unveil what is hidden and to hide what is shown. And so that is basically the fine line between pornography and sensuality. And this is what he's continuously exploiting with this other final body of work.
These are all his original cuttings.
They are.
Astonishing that he kept them all.
Well, the estate, who's now representing and preserving his legacy, has been doing, I think, an incredibly important work, which is really preserving not only the finished artwork, but also the material which has been used in preparation of those artworks. We got here about 300 Polaroids which haven't been framed, which we could choose from, to make some more articulated displays, but we decided not to present because we really wanted to focus on the finished material in Polaroid sense, and instead kind of giving more of an idea what was the original source material that he was using for making these Polaroids.
Well, it's a remarkable exhibition. I would recommend anyone anyone to come and look at it because it's just so stunning. How long is it going to be here for?
We're going to be open until the 11th of January 2015 with this exhibition, and of course we're going to be closed for Christmas and New Year. But any other time, we're open Tuesday to Sunday, 10:30 to 5:30.
And what about after it's been here? Is it going to go to somewhere else, this exhibition?
The exhibition is traveling to Switzerland, and it originated in Belgium. So it's an international traveling exhibition that we have been co-producing with Wils in Brussels and Costale Freiburg.
But we're lucky to have it here, so this is the place to see it. Robert Heinecken at the Open Eye Gallery. Lessons in posing subjects. Well worth seeing. It's on for a few more weeks, and definitely don't miss that one. Well, next week in Arts Alive, we're going to do an in-depth feature on someone who coined the phrase 15-minute wonder. This was someone who was a pioneer in computer-generated art, one of the outstanding features of the 20th century. He, of course, is Andy Warhol. See you next time.